I was 35,000 feet in the air, the night I decided I must be the worst dad on the planet, sitting on a red-eye from Denver to Portland, with my 8-month-old daughter melting down in my lap, and every single person around us acting like I'd personally ruined their lives. Mia wasn't just fussy, she was full-on screaming, red-faced, back arched, that uncontrollable baby cry that cuts straight through your spine, and I could feel 40 pairs of eyes on the back of my neck while I did this pathetic little dance of bouncing, shushing, praying. You know what I mean? Trying every trick I'd read online at 2 a.m. A guy in a blazer 2 rows up actually lifted his sleep mask just to glare around the cabin and announce to no one in particular. Some people really shouldn't fly with infants, like the whole purpose of the flight was his beauty sleep, and my daughter had personally declared war on it. The woman in front of us did those big, exaggerated sighs and looked back just long enough to let me know I was failing her too. And somewhere behind me I heard somebody whisper, "Where's the mom?" with that tone that already had a story written about us. I was sweating through my t-shirt. My hands were shaking, and Mia just kept ramping up, pushing the bottle away, spitting the pacifier out, batting at my face with these little fists while I whispered into her hair, "I'm sorry. Peanut Daddy's trying. I'm trying, I promise, like if I said it enough times it would magically fix everything." Then I saw the flight attendant heading down the aisle, that tight professional smile plastered on the one that really means, "We have a situation," and my stomach just dropped because I knew what was coming. The suggestion I drag my crying baby to the back like she was a broken carry-on they could tuck out of sight. That's when the woman across the aisle stood up. "No." "Excuse me, no," awkward. Hovering just stood up, stepped into the aisle and held out her arms, like this was the most normal thing in the world, like we were in a living room and not a metal tube hurtling through the dark. "Here," she said, calm and steady, "set me." And for a second my whole body went rigid because every rule in my head was blaring that you do not hand your baby to a stranger in an airplane, absolutely not. She looked wrecked in this familiar way, though. Dark hair yanked into a messy ponytail, shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't touch a little girl. Around 4, knocked out cold against the window behind her, clutching a stuffed fox by the tail. And there was something in her voice that just cut through my panic. While my brain was still screaming, oh, my arms hesitated for half a heartbeat. And in that tiny crack, she stepped closer, slid her arms under Mia with this gentle, practiced motion, and lifted my daughter right out of my hands. The entire cabin went silent. Even Blazer Guy shut up mid-complaint. The flight attendant froze like someone had hit pause. Mia was still wailing, reaching for me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might throw up. And then this woman did something so simple, it should not have felt as unthinkable as it did. She pulled Mia against her chest, closed her eyes, and started humming. It wasn't a song I recognized, not some top 40 lullaby, more like this low, old-fashioned melody, half lullaby, half prayer, and she just swayed there in the aisle back and forth like she'd done this 100 times in tiny hallways and cramped apartments, her hand rubbing slow circles on Mia's back. And Mia just stopped. I'm not exaggerating for effect here. 1 second she's screaming her lungs out. The next she lets out this last hiccup of a sob, grabs onto a fistful of the woman's hair, and collapses against her like a switch flipped inside her little body. The tension in the plane vanished, like someone had opened a window. People went back to their screens and neck pillows. The flight attendant quietly backed away toward the galley, and I sat there with empty arms watching a stranger soothe my daughter in 20 seconds after I had failed for 40 minutes, feeling a mix of shame and relief so intense I didn't know whether to say thank you or ask for my heart back. Let me back up for a second, or this is going to sound like just another airplane story. My name is Jonah, and 8 months before that flight, I was not a single dad trying to survive the Judgment Olympics at cruising altitude. I was a husband, painting a nursery, the wrong color, while my wife laughed at me from the doorway. Claire was the natural. She read the books, joined the mom groups, had the birth plan printed and laminated, talked to Mia through her belly like they already had inside jokes. I was supposed to be backup, the guy who held the snacks and installed the car seat, crooked 3 times. Mia came early on a rainy Tuesday in April, loud and stubborn from minute 1. And for maybe 40 seconds, I watched Claire hold her cheeks, wet, eyes shining, saying, "Hi, baby, I'm your mom." And then everything went sideways. Someone said the word hemorrhage. They hit some red button on the wall, and suddenly the room was full of shouting and blood, and they were wheeling my wife away, and the next time I saw her, they were telling me, "We did everything we could," in that voice that sounds like compassion, but feels like the floor dropping out from under you. So yeah, by the time I got on that plane 8 months later, I had a chip on my shoulder the size of a carry-on, and I had prepared like my entire worth as a father depended on it. I picked a red eye thinking she'd sleep aisle seat, so I could pace if I had to diaper bag, packed with military precision, extra outfits in Ziplocs, pre-measured formula, backup binkies, a white noise app on my phone, every blog trick I'd ever read at 3 a.m., written in my brain like a checklist. The one thing I didn't plan for was that grief and babies both have zero respect for your schedule. So there we were, somewhere over Idaho, all my careful prep crumbling, as Mia spun up from whine to full meltdown, people around us shifting in their seats, blazer guy rolling his eyes, someone behind me whispering, "Can't he just walk her?" And that old tape in my head turned up. "They think you have no idea what you're doing. They're right, she needs her mom, you're just the understudy who got pushed on stage when the real actor died." When the woman finally slid into the empty seat next to me with Mia knocked out cold on her shoulder, I felt like I'd been hollowed out. "I'm Lena," she said softly, who's still on my daughter. "And before you start thinking I'm some kind of baby whisperer, I promise you, I'm not." I just remember this part way too well. Her kid Zoe, the 4-year-old with the stuffed fox, was starfished across the window seat again, snoring softly. I gave her my name, probably sounded like gravel, and half joked that I wasn't sure if I should thank her or ask for ID, and she snorted this tired little laugh, nodding toward her daughter. If it helps, I've done the midnight scream tour with that one too, buses, trains, grocery store aisles, you name it. There's something about being trapped in the dark in a flying tube with a stranger who's seen you at your absolute worst that makes honesty way easier than it has any right to be. I told her about Claire, about how 8 months ago I didn't know which end of a diaper was up, how I still sometimes guessed my way through Mia's different cries, how every sideways look from a stranger felt like a verdict. Lena told me about her ex, how he bailed when Zoe was 6 months old, saying he wasn't cut out to be a dad, like fatherhood was a shirt he'd tried on in a fitting room. And her mom, Elena, who moved in, took night shifts with the baby, so Lena could work, cooked, cleaned, held the whole house together. And then last week, out of nowhere, a heart attack in the kitchen, pancakes half flipped, and suddenly Lana was on a flight home from a funeral, staring at the seat back, like it might give her instructions. We just sat there, the 3 of us, breathing in sync, Mia on her shoulder, Zoe snoring me, clinging to the armrest, like it was the only solid thing in my life, and she said quietly, "You know what I saw when you were holding her, Jonah? You looked scared. Not just of the crying, scared of failing her babies, feel that they pick up everything. Sometimes it helps when someone who isn't carrying all that fear holds them for a minute." That's all I did. When the plane started to descend, and the lights came back up, Zoe blinked awake and stared at us with this little serious frown kids get when they're deciding who you are in their story. "Is that your baby?" she asked me, pointing at Mia, and when I said yes, she tilted her head. "Why do you look sad?" And Lena swooped in with, He's just tired like us, Bug. But the question hung there anyway. Zoe told me her grandma had gone to heaven, that her mom said she was watching from the sky, then asked if I thought she could see the plane, and I swear something in my chest shifted when I told her I thought she could see everything and was probably really proud of her and her mom, because I realized I wanted that to be true for Claire and us too. When we landed, it was the usual chaos. People popping up before the seatbelt sign went off, yanking bags out of overhead bins pretending they were in some kind of race. And I reached for Mia, suddenly afraid Lena might actually just walk off with her if I waited even a second, which is insane, I know, but grief scrambles your common sense. She handed Mia back like she was returning something precious, our fingers brushing for a moment, that sparked a feeling I hadn't let myself have since the hospital. "I don't know how to thank you," I said. "You didn't have to do any of that." And she shrugged, stuffing snacks and the fox into Zoe's little backpack. "I know. But I wanted to, and sometimes that's enough." Zoe tugged on my sleeve. Then totally serious. "You could come to our house. I have toys. I can show the baby, my toys." And I laughed, expecting Lena to redirect, to give the polite maybe another time. But instead she paused, hand on the seat back, looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm not ready for whatever this is. I just buried my mom half the time. I don't know what day it is, but..." And she dug out a crumpled receipt, scribbled something on the back, and pressed it into my hand. "I work here, Harbor Light Cafe, Harbor Street. Zoe and I are there most mornings, no pressure, no expectations. But if you ever need a place to sit where people won't stare at you for having a bad day, we make that kind of coffee." I folded that receipt like it was made of glass and tucked it into my wallet, watched her walk away up the aisle with Zoe, and the fox watched them disappear into the river of passengers, and yeah, I stayed in my seat. I'd love to tell you I marched right to that cafe the next day, but the truth is uglier and a lot more human. The next 8 months were a blur of daycare drop-offs, work trying to remember to eat something that wasn't crackers over the sink, grocery runs with Mia strapped to my chest, and strangers saying, "Super Dad," like I was a circus act. People told me I was amazing, that Claire would be proud, and every compliment stacked up into this invisible wall I built between myself and everyone else, because if I let them believe I was some kind of hero, maybe they wouldn't see how often I locked myself in the bathroom to just breathe. At night, when Mia was finally asleep and the apartment was too quiet, I'd sit on the couch and pull out that receipt thumb tracing the faded ink. Harbor Light Cafe, Harbor Street, Lena's messy handwriting curling across the back. And I'd tell myself, tomorrow, we'll go. Then morning came, I'd dress Mia, strap her into the car seat, drive all the way across town, park, across from the cafe with the blue awning and hanging plants, and just sit there, hands on the wheel, watching other people go in and out. Couples sharing muffins, moms juggling toddlers and lattes. An older guy I later learned was Mr. Patel, wiping tables and laughing with regulars, and every time I'd find a reason to turn the key and drive away. Meanwhile, Mia grew the way babies do, even when your heart feels stuck. She learned to pull herself up on the coffee table, to take those wobbly little steps that are half falling, half flying. She figured out da-da and more, and I figured out the science of packing a diaper bag like an emergency kit. But there were still nights where something unseen tripped inside her, and she cried like she had on the plane, like the world was ending. Only she knew why. I would rock her and hum dumb, made-up songs, nothing worked. And one night, out of pure desperation, I found myself humming that melody from The Flight, low and shaky, like I was remembering someone else's childhood, and her body softened. Her face pressed into my neck. Her sobs turned into these little sighs, and she started humming too, her tiny version of that song. It took me weeks to realize that the weird little sound she made to comfort herself before bed was her copy of Lena's lullaby. That realization hit me like a twist in a movie. This stranger hadn't just calmed my kid, once she had literally left a sound in her bones, and in mine too. On Mia's first birthday, I woke up before dawn listening to her babble to her stuffed giraffe through the baby monitor, and something in me just broke open, not in a dramatic movie way, more like a tired voice finally standing up in the back of the room and saying, "Enough." I dressed her in this little yellow dress with daisies that Claire's mom had mailed in a box that still smelled like her house, strapped her into the car, and drove to Harbor Street without letting myself think about it. The cafe looked exactly like it had every other time I chickened out. Blue awning chalkboard out front bragging about famous cinnamon rolls plants in the windows. But this time, instead of watching from the car, I unbuckled Mia, set her on my hip, and walked through the door. The bell above us chimed, heads turned briefly, then went back to their coffees, laptops, conversations, and I scanned the room already thinking, "She's not here, and it's been too long, of course she's not here." And then I saw her. Not Lena, not yet. I saw Zoe first at a corner table by the window, curls longer now, legs kicking under her chair, hunched over a coloring page with that same tongue sticking out in concentration. The stuffed fox propped on the chair beside her like a tiny, battered bodyguard. She glanced up, her eyes got huge, and then she shot out of her seat like she'd been launched, yelling, "Mom! Mom! It's the airplane man! The airplane man with the loud baby," and every single person in that cafe looked up exactly as Lena turned from the counter, dish towel in one hand, hair in a braid, flour on her apron, laughing at something Mr. Patel had said, until her eyes followed Zoe's pointing arm and landed on me. She stopped laughing, like someone unplugged her, her gaze dropping from my face to Mia on my hip, and back up again. And for a second, it felt like the whole room held its breath. Mia twisted in my arms, then reached out with both hands toward Lena and shouted clear as a bell, "Mama," and I swear I felt the color drain out of my face. "No, baby, that's not—" I started, absolutely mortified, but Lena was already around the counter, apron half untied, tears on her cheeks before she even reached us. "You came," she said, voice shaking in that way that tells you the person has rehearsed everything they'd say 100 times and forgotten all of it. "I honestly thought I made you up half the time." I told her the truth, that I almost hadn't, that I'd driven here and not walked in more times than I could count, but that Mia had never really stopped talking about her in her own way, that she hummed the lullaby at night, that I'd caught myself doing it too, that it took me weeks to realize it was the song Lena had sung at 35,000 feet. Lena's hand went to her mouth like she was trying to hold something in. "That was my mom's," she whispered. "She used to sing it when the power went out, and I was scared of the dark. I've been singing it to Zoe since she was born. I didn't even think about it on the plane, it just came out." Zoe crashed into us, then wrapping her little arms around my leg and cooing at Mia like we were old friends. "I told you you could come see my toys." "Remember, Mom?" I said the loud baby could come to the coloring corner. "We have purple crayons, that one's my favorite. But I'll share." And Lena laughed through the tears, telling Zoe to show Mia where the crayons were, asking me with her eyes if it was okay to let my daughter toddle off with hers. Watching those two little girls grab hands and wobble toward the toy basket like they'd been planning it for months did something to me I can't fully explain. Lena and I stood there near the door, shoulders almost touching both, watching our kids, and she said quietly, she called me Mama like she was tasting the word for the first time, and I started to apologize again, but she shook her head. "Don't be sorry," my mom used to say. Kids see things we're too scared to admit. She had this whole speech about good men being the ones who stay, not the ones who say the right things, not the ones who show up when it's easy, The ones who are still there when it's ugly and hard, and no one is clapping, she said. I'd know one when I saw him, because he'd already be doing the hard stuff alone. She turned fully to look at me, then eyes red but clear. You've been doing this alone for a year, Jonah. You didn't run. Yeah, you're terrified, I can see it from the door. But you stayed, that counts for something. I wanted to shrug it off, crack a joke, say something like, mostly, I just kept not dropping her, but all that came out was the truth. I don't know how to do this, any of this. I feel like I'm making it up every day. And she huffed out this breathy, almost laugh, same. I still wake up thinking I need to make coffee for my mom, and then remember she's not here. I don't know how to be a person without her yet, but maybe we can stop pretending we're supposed to figure it out alone. That was the moment Mr. Patel cleared his throat way too loudly from behind the counter and called Lena. Are you going to introduce me to your dramatic entrance, or do I just keep pretending I'm not watching the best soap opera of my week? And the whole room kind of exhaled into a laugh. She dragged me to a little table by the window, told me it was where her mother sat every morning with her tea, and crossword, ran her fingers over a small heart carved into the corner, and suddenly it made sense why there was always an empty seat there when I'd watched from the car. We sat, we drank coffee I barely tasted, we split a muffin Mr. Patel accidentally made too big, and we talked. About Claire, about Elena, about that night on the plane, about how heavy it is to be the adult in charge when you still feel like a scared kid inside. At some point, our hands found each other on the tabletop and didn't move. At some point, Mia and Zoe came running over with a chaotic masterpiece, 4 wobbly stick figures in a row under a bright scribbled sky, and Mia jabbed at the paper with her finger and announced proudly, "Family, and you better believe both of us lost it a little right then. Here's where I don't tie it up with a neat bow for you. We're still figuring it out, one coffee, one meltdown, one crayon drawing at a time. But that night on the plane, the moment that felt so unthinkable, a stranger standing up, crossing an aisle, taking my baby into her arms without asking. That was the crack that let some light into a life I'd kept sealed off out of fear. So let me ask you, because I know some of you already picked a side halfway through this story. If you were on that flight, would you have done what Lena did? Or would you have sat there pretending not to hear a dad drowning 3 feet away? If you were me, would you have let her take your child? Or gritted your teeth and stayed alone in the storm because good parents handle it themselves? Were those other passengers just exhausted? Or were they part of the problem too? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you think she crossed a line or saved us both that night. Tell me if you've ever been that parent being judged in public, or the stranger who decided to help. Anyway, hit like if this hit a nerve, subscribe if you want more messy, honest stories like this, and then scroll down and tell your own, because somewhere there's another tired parent watching this at 2 a.m. with a crying baby and a heart full of fear, wondering if anyone would ever cross an aisle for them.